You're listening to the Coffee Podcast. I'm Jesse Hartman. Conversations about sustainability can be exhausting. I believe part of this exhaustion comes from greenwashing, where brands deliberately label everything sustainable with either ulterior or misguided motives. But it is also exhausting because the topics are complex, the problems difficult to quantify, and the solutions even harder to pin down. Identifying problems and solutions requires significant interdisciplinary collaboration, farmers, scientists, researchers, all of us. We frequently discuss sustainability on the Coffee Podcast, not only because it's an urgent issue, but also because we aim to understand and disseminate the key challenges and potential solutions. Our goal is to inspire people just like you and offer some hope for the future of coffee. In this conversation, at least for me, Andrea Illy does just that by laying a foundation for whole value chain collaboration. What is the current status of the coffee industry with climate change from what you've seen?
Well, not easy. It could be worse, but it could be better. It depends on the country. Some countries seems to be more resilient. Brazil, because Brazil is also less impacted by the main cause of climatic problems, which are the Niño and the Niña. But you have to consider that 2/3 of coffee-producing countries produce coffee in LATAM, starting from Central America to South America, okay? So South America, you only have few countries, Brazil and Colombia on top. But all this north part of South America and Central America are dramatically impacted by the Niño and the Niña. And the Niña and the Niña is this ENSO cycle. It has a kind of a potch of big potch of hot water or cold water. And this is kind of swinging from Southeast Asia to east of Galapagos, more or less, let me say. And this dramatically influences, dependently if you have Niño or Niña, the climate in Colombia and in the other Central American countries. Colombia has to react so strongly against this threat that they develop a sequence of different varieties locally breeded and selected in order to adapt to the extreme climate events. They did huge work in replanting a program funded by the government involving hundreds of thousands of coffee growers in order to introduce these new plants. And they were expecting, first of all, to reduce production, decrease production to a kind of historical minimum, and then they were expecting to double that, and they didn't succeed yet. Why this? We don't know, but for sure we know that unfortunately the impact of climate change is increasing exponentially, because nothing is linear, right? Why exponentially? Because, temperature is increasing exponentially, because it's not about temperature, it's about heat, and heat accumulates in the atmosphere and it accumulates in the sea. So warmer the average sea temperature, the stronger are the impacts on climate. Just to give you a figure, every 1 degree of temperature increase, you have 6% or more moisture in the air. And this creates extremely violent, let's say, hurricanes or weather events which are really jeopardizing. And on the opposite side, when you have the other Niño and Niña alternating, you might have drought, hot temperatures, which are the exact opposite conditions preventing production on the other side. So this is what happens in Colombia and many Central American countries as well, very, very, very often, too often, more and more often. The climate accidents are more and more frequent and intense. But it's also influencing weather in Africa a lot, particularly the Horn of Africa, like Ethiopia, Rwanda, Kenya, etc. The same dynamics. And then India is a big problem because too much rain, erratic. 1 year is drought, too dry, and the other year is too rainy because of the monsoon, etc., etc. So we are fighting, I must say. One problem, besides the impact, is that the very first impacted is quality, not quantity. Because you have drought, you put the plant in a stressful condition, it needs to over-defend itself and sacrifice the bean quality. So literally, this is one of the big threats because it might jeopardize the big success of, gourmet coffee in the world. This is one problem. And the second to suffer is quantity, productivity, because if you have too high temperatures, over 32 degrees, for instance, the productivity drops like a stone, and this is the second big problem. So, and of course, this causes higher costs. So most importantly, we can talk about how to react to that if you want, because this is the priority.
Yeah, I think highlighting maybe in a few words what you said here, which is that climate essentially has put us in a position where, as you put it, it might jeopardize the quality of coffee and also how much is produced. And so what we might see is lesser quality coffee at a higher price.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Which is something we don't want because we want this gourmet coffee to expand,
Right. Even as you talk about the history of illycafé and even your role in the technical quality role that you played, the idea that quality is going to go down and there's nothing you can do about it seems pretty frightening for something that you've worked your whole life for, right?
Yes, but there are solutions because we have to consider that as a consequence of low margins, and as a consequence of very high market volatility, revenues, income for raw coffee growers is not enough. They are not in the capacity to invest for improving their agronomical practices and renovating their plantation.
Correct,
but
yes.
Would they be in condition to improve their agronomical practices and renovate their plantation? They would have significant benefits, both in terms of productivity, because the world average productivity is pretty low. It can at least double on average, which is also a good response to, let's say, the problem of deforestation. You don't need to deforest. If you grow coffee with good agronomical practices, you can double production, and doubling production would really put us in condition to satisfy the consumption increase. But it would also increase pricing, because if you have a higher quality, a premium, gourmet coffee, you can command for a premium. The consumer is more than ready to pay higher dollars, per cup. The experience is really good. So the trigger in this case might be how much you invest in a coffee plantation. This is the problem, the investment capacity of coffee growers. So in my view, we are definitely under investment. First of all, we have to consider that most majority, 90% plus, of coffee growers in the world are micro growers. And for micro growers, it's very, 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 very difficult to get organized because they are kind of subsistence agriculture in most. Many times they don't even know if they own the land, and they don't have any facility whatsoever. They have to rely upon co-ops, etc., for their processing, etc. But still, the same basic problem remains. How much do you invest per hectare in order to adapt and mitigate climate change? We believe that $1,000 per hectare should be investment. As there are 11.5 million hectares coffee grown, that means that we would need to have a program of minimum, let's say, $10 billion to invest for building resilience. Mm-hmm. 12 billion is too much money because currently the best estimate, which is a Conservation International old estimate, is that no more than 350 million are invested in coffee plantation every year. So it's impossible to multiply by 30 this figure. So the idea is let's implement a renovation, and let's say an adaptation program in 10 years, over 10 years period, and try to create a 1 billion, let's say, public-private fund. This could change the game. But in order to do it, it should be consumer countries' money, because we do have the money. Because paradoxically, roasters, they consolidate 90% of the value chain, and growers, but they rely upon investments in the 10% value chain made by coffee growers. So you might ask, but why don't you fix it? We have not been able yet to fix it because there is the equator. The equator is much worse than the Berlin Wall, because it's harder to overcome from any possible, let's say, point of view, starting from the cost of money one, but also from the legal and administrative and financial ones, also particularly when you have to work hand in hand with micro growers. But I think it's possible. We are working institutionally on that opportunity, this challenge. Let's say it's like really climbing the Mount Everest. But should we be able to make it, then we would probably have a big improvement.
Let me just hit on a few things that we've talked about so far, just to kind of consolidate a little bit. One of the things that we're talking about here is, you mentioned earlier on that a producer may be able to double their production with the land that they currently have and say they grow a better quality coffee. That sounds super ideal, right? I'm growing more coffee, it's at a higher quality, and so I'm making a lot more money as a producer or as maybe a micro producer. But the investment capacity, so in order to do that, so we talked a little bit about renovation, these micro producers, they don't have the investment capacity to do anything about this, right?
Yes.
And if we continue on kind of the idea, you said, really the kind of investment that we need from a private public fund is something around 10 billion, but that doesn't seem achievable when the current spend is somewhere around 350 million. So that money can't come from the small producers, is what we normally say.
Exactly. It cannot come from growing countries only. We should create one pool, a resource pool, to be allocated in producing countries, but this pool should be made of all coffee, let's say, value chain money. This is what we should leverage.
Okay.
Imagine that you add maybe few cents per pound for the coffee you buy, how much money you would raise.
Oh, yes.
This is something that is already existing because roasters are used to pay premiums for certified coffee in order to get the quality differentiation and sustainability differentiation. What about paying a premium to have a kind of the equivalent of an insurance plan which ensures your coffee security in the future? This is the idea.
Yeah, this is echoing a lot of what I remember hearing at one of the first, it might have been the first World Producers Forum, this idea that you charge a few cents more. I think that was per cup.
I brought this idea years ago in 2018, and then I brought the idea once again in the World Coffee Forum in Colombia last year. And I spoke about this idea again, because in the meantime, we are running a feasibility study in the second, let's say, in the last World Coffee Forum in India, in Bangalore, 3 weeks ago.
Amazing. Okay. And the other thought that I'm having is the side of the coffee chain that is roasting coffee or selling coffee, if they take on more price, they're likely to need to offload that on the consumer. But we know historically that the consumer is really sensitive to price change.
Yes and no. First of all, if you go to retail price, particularly if you go to cup price served in a coffee shop, the cost increase would be diluted that it's completely impossible to perceive it, okay? We are talking about 1 or 2%, no more than that. Really little money. 1, 2, maybe maximum 5% price increase is nothing. It's really the 5%, of the green coffee.
Yes.
And if you put it in retail price, it would be less than 0.5% price increase. It's ridiculous. It's totally diluted.
Okay.
The consumer could be proud of participating, like a kind of crowdfunding approach to building resilience in the coffee plantations.
Oh, I like that. I like that perspective. Yeah. The reason I laughed is I've done my fair share of working in coffee in my early days as a barista. I remember we raised our prices by like 5 cents on a cup of coffee. And this one customer he said he was never coming back. So that's kind of why I was laughing. But to your point, seriously, the dilution of that offloading of the cost to the consumer won't be perceived probably. And more to your point, if we advertise, hey, price might have barely went up for the customer, but guess what? You're participating in a sustainable future for coffee. And these are really cool concepts.
Yes, exactly. The challenge, Jesse, is to build a kind of a collaborative network in which people, roasters, traders, growers, politicians in producing countries, everybody collaborates for the future of coffee. This would be the dream. Is it possible or impossible? I don't know. When I look around what's going on in the world, I sometimes feel desperate, but never know. And this is my dream, that coffee always to be a kind of a role model for all agricultural commodities, in the way we work, in the way we cultivate it in a sustainable way, in the way we treat growers, in the way we care for health, consumer health. Because, we didn't speak about health, but one of a gigantic benefit of coffee is that it makes you live better and longer. There are 25,000 scientific studies confirming that coffee is about less disease and longer life.
Yeah.
With no disadvantage at all, because it doesn't even have calories that make you gain weight. It's really amazing. And why should we keep charging coffee a fraction of what you would pay for a beer or for a Coke or for a glass of wine? Why should the price of coffee be so low? It's just a cultural legacy, which is wrong.
Yeah.
Because it's totally wrong, because eventually it reduces the grower's capacity to grow sustainable and quality. And it definitely also compromises their livelihood. So it's a kind of a selfish approach that cannot be overcome with market dynamics like the, free market, etc. Because, of course, everybody will go downwards pricing.
Yeah.
But no, we put at stake the future of coffee itself. So this is why we should kind of stand up and really create a positive movement for coffee.
I really agree with you on every front. The thing that I think always throws me off here, though, is something you mentioned before, which is that the amount of money made up, I'm going to say this not as well as you did, but the amount of money that is captured in coffee, you said something to the effect of 90% is held on the roaster side, right?
Consuming countries one.
Yeah.
So consuming countries, they consolidate 90%. If you take the green coffee exported from a producing country, the value, and you compare with the retail value of a coffee cup or a coffee package on the shelf of a retail store, it's 90%.
Right. So that idea, isn't that basically saying that, as it is, the dispersion of funds is not very equivalent down back to the producers in the first place?
Of course, because, it was the same with wine. A century ago, wine was made by winemakers who were buying grapes by growers. And the growers were kind of, letting to sell the grapes to these wine producers, and they were buying very little prices.
Yeah.
But one day, grape growers, they stepped up and say, we are going to produce wine ourselves. This is what they did.
Yeah.
Why have they been capable of doing that? Number one, because you don't have the equator. You drink wine in the same place where you produce it.
Oh.
And number two, you don't need to invest so much money for building a coffee cellar and produce your own wine. The biggest, capital in a winery is the land, which is already on the grower's shoulders. And then you have the cost of the cellar, meant as the bottle that you are aging.
Mm.
But other than that, and this can be easily transferred to the market, but other than that, it's not capital intensive for a grape grower to produce his own wine. Very differently from what happens with coffee, because coffee, the best case, you can put a roaster in your plantation, but then how do you export to the United States? How are you going to distribute this product? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How are you organizing to, import roasted coffee, et cetera, et cetera? Very many hurdles, which make it difficult, particularly because it's grown in low-income countries in most of the cases, except Brazil and few others.
Yeah, that's a good point. We're touching on a lot of topics here. Maybe we can talk a little bit about the Ernesto Illy International Coffee Award, because I know that you have an event coming up. And can you tell us a little bit about what tools would you say Illy uses to aid farmers to be more sustainable?
First of all, our direct sourcing model is based on 4 fundamental activities. 1, choosing only the best producers in the best ecosystems. So we need places where the potential for coffee quality is very, very, very high. That means the ecosystem, the varietals which are grown, blah, blah, blah. But we also need the best people motivated to really do the best in their life. So once we have them on board, number 2 is knowledge transfer. So we created this University of Coffee, 1999. So it's very old now. It's organized in 3 departments, 1 for coffee growers, 1 for professional of hospitality, and the 3rd for coffee connoisseurs, so basically coffee drinkers. So over time, this University of Coffee trained over 500,000 people community. And we exchange knowledge with coffee growers so that we can transfer them the best practices, the best agronomical practices, and help them exceed the best market standard. This is why over time, over the decades, we have been able to start buying coffee cultivated especially for us with standards which are higher than official market standards. Third step is to pay them buy directly with no intermediary and pay a premium price, which is on average 30%. So which gives them a return, not only in terms of finances, but also in terms of reputation, because if they have been able to sell coffee to us, that means that their quality is really good. And last but not least, building a community. So these growers are a community under a club, kind of a club, and they have the opportunity to cross-fertilize each other within their own countries and also with other countries so that they can benchmark and, teach the one to the other about their practices and constantly improve quality. And I can tell you that the most loyal coffee growers of that community sell coffee to us over 30 years.
Wow.
Continuously every single year. That's amazing, really. So the idea of the Ernesto Illy Award is the ultimate recognition in order to build pride and motivation. Also motivation and aspiration for those who are not a part of the community yet. So we pick the 3 best growers of the 9 main countries of our blend. We bring them to typically New York, and we award them at the United Nations. And then we have a big party and so on and so forth.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there are amazing stories, amazing narratives about winners of the award that we could spend hours talking, but it's really something beautiful.
So the producers actually get to visit New York City if they qualify, or how does that? Okay. Oh, very cool.
27 growers, the 3 best of the 9 countries, come to New York, and then they know who's the winner, second and third. And then an independent jury with no Illy people in the jury selects the best of the best.
Ah, very cool.
In the night, we announce who's the best of the best. On another side, thousands of consumers all over the world, they make coffee tasting weeks before the award to choose what is the so-called coffee lover's choice. So there are 2 awards among the 27. The best of the best, which is chosen by the most sophisticated, gourmet chefs, journalists, expert in general, coffee expert as well, not only. And on the other side, the democratic, let's say, popular choice with coffee lovers one. And at least one time we did have the incredible experience that the winner has been the same. It was a community of women producing coffee in Rwanda. Such a big satisfaction, because we change their life. It's amazing.
That is amazing.
Amazing.
That is really fun. It's really fun. Andrea, there's just so much we could talk about, and it's hard to stay on topic because I just have so many questions for you. You've been around the sector for a long time. I mean, this has been your life's work to be in coffee. Your 2 main passions are quality and sustainability, which actually are mine as well, which people probably pick up on the podcast. We talk a lot about quality and a lot about sustainability.
Let me say that I have a mission for our customers, a passion for our culture, which is the good and goodness and beauty, and an obsession for sustainable quality.
I do have some final questions. This is a moment for you to help us, maybe even pursue some more conversations on the podcast. Are there things about the coffee sector that frustrate you? And then on the other side, I want to ask you, are there things about this industry that give you hope for its future? So on one side, what are things about the industry, maybe ways that you mentioned greenwashing obviously is a problem, but what are some things that bother you, things that you're concerned about, messages that you would like to undo maybe? And then on the other side, what are things about this industry that give you hope?
Yeah, one of my frustrations, the main one, is the relevance of coffee in the consumer mind. Why are consumers, crazy about becoming wine connoisseurs, even sommelier, having their own wine cellar, picking the best possible wine in restaurants, etc. They don't give equal amount of importance to coffee, which is even richer as a culture and as an experience. Why should not coffee be as noble as wine? So I put this on the shoulders of maybe all the community of roasters. Maybe we don't do a good enough job in making coffee more relevant as it should be. But I also have an historical perspective that coffee culture at the end of the day is much younger than the wine, because wine is over 1 millennia, whereas coffee is 4th century. So I really hope that in the future we will continue building this coffee connoisseurship, which will command much better quality, sustainability, livelihood for coffee growers, and even health for consumers themselves. So this is one. The rest is, I would dream one day that as a coffee community, we become, as I said before, much more collaborative, participatory, and we do whatever is needed at pre-competitive level to build a better coffee sector. I tell you, when the International Coffee Organization, which is the sole intergovernmental organization for the coffee sector, when it was founded with two groups, growers country and consumer countries, like they would be two opposed camps, like they would be kind of fighting each other, etc. This is not the way we can build a better coffee world. We are all in the same camp. We are all in the same boat. Whether you have better coffee or not, this depends on a collective effort which starts in a plantation and ends in a cup, or even more than in a cup, in the throat, in the mouth of a consumer, smiling with the experience he just had.
Yeah, your call for collaboration I find to be really inspirational. And I mean, with the work that Illy is doing across initiatives and projects, maybe Illy will continue to lead these efforts with things like the Regenerative Society Foundation, rewarding quality and, practice of producers. We've really learned a lot from you from these two conversations. And I'm going to enter into closing conversations, even though I wish I could ask you more questions. Let's talk about this. What are you working on, and how can our listeners of the podcast be a part of that?
Number one work is to work hand in hand with the CEO of the company, Christina Scocchia, to make Illy a better company, to continue to grow. And we have a roadmap for a future IPO. Okay, this is what we are doing. I can proudly say that the company did grow 20 times bigger in the last 30 years, but is still the same as used to be. Same product, same quality, same philosophy, same principle, same behavior from our people and so on. So this is, it's not easy to grow a company by maintaining an absolute consistency with your DNA, basically. Second big job, which is still in the coffee sector, but it's institutional. I'm collaborating with any possible coffee institution in order to try to build this adaptation plan with all necessary resources. Knowledge, new varieties. For instance, we did sequence the Arabica genome, and we immediately gave the basis to the World Coffee Research so that they can have the knowledge resource needed for their work. So this is just an example of investments that we did for the sake of participating to build a better coffee world. And so, as I said, we are now busy at seeing whether we can improve and increase the amount of finance invested in the coffee plantation around the world, which takes me quite busy. And the third and last, let's say, business occupation is an absolutely philanthropical one, is a give back, let's say, activity, is the Regenerative Society Foundation. This is an interesting story because when I presented publicly the virtuous agriculture framework that I described before, it get so much interest that a couple of entrepreneurs came to me and say, hey, we want to create a foundation centered around the regeneration. Would you consider chair it? Or, Jeffrey Sachs, who is my mentor since over 30 years. Well, I said, okay, let me see. So we became both chairman of this foundation. He's, of course, my mentor, and I'm more executive as a position. And we have been working in the last 4 years to create an exciting model, because there are a few things that people don't know about sustainability. First of all, sustainability, consistently with the Brundtland definition, which is satisfying our current needs without, second part, compromising the future generation ones. But what does it mean? At the end of the day, sustainability means perpetuating the living conditions on our planet. living conditions on our planet, all of them, no one excluded, are provided by nature, by the so-called ecosystem services. The air you breathe, the water you drink, the food you eat, the fabric you wear, the materials you surround in your office, up to the climate stability and the health you can benefit from the environment are provided by ecosystem services. How does nature perpetuate these ecosystems? Regeneration, spontaneous regeneration of the biosphere, no matter if it is a terrestrial or aquatic ecosystems. So the conclusion of this fact, let's say, is that there cannot be sustainability without regeneration, or in other words, no regeneration, no sustainability. So this is one thing that we have to take a very important aspect. And we are working in building a framework to develop a model which allows us to transition from the past-present extractive model, which works extracting natural resources like they were infinite, and they are definitely not infinite. But most importantly, that it is linear. At the end of the life cycle, it generates a waste, which then accumulates in the environment, hindering spontaneous regeneration of the biosphere. We consume 2 times as much nature can regenerate every year. And as a consequence of that, we are reducing our natural capital stock. And this is a vicious circle, because the lower the natural capital stock, the lower the regenerative capacity, the more we will exceed consumption and the more we will increase the natural. So it's very, 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 very dangerous. Second fundamental aspect is everything is interconnected. Not only, as everybody knows, economical, social, and environmental sustainability are deeply intertwined. And you like it or not, but we have to conclude that we have to say, if it is not economically sustainable, it cannot be socially sustainable. If it is not socially sustainable, it cannot be environmentally sustainable. But more importantly, we are talking, as a consequence of this natural capital depletion, we are talking about a gigantic, horrible environmental crisis. So that means if you try to manage, because these are so complex systems, the society, the economy, and nature, if you try to curb a complex system into linear, you are doomed to fail. So any reductionist approach in managing sustainability doesn't work. So the idea that we are now running like crazy in decarbonization, and maybe we don't consider all the other ecosystem needed to safeguard our living conditions, this is very, very, very dangerous. So this is why we are approaching sustainability, our framework, in a systemic way. We built a framework which is built on well-being, meant as health and inclusivity. If I conquer the consumer mind and instill the idea that sustainability is about regeneration, then I conquer one consumer, one worker, one voter, and one investor. Just to give you a dimension of the power each individual has in his quadruple capacity. Imagine that you have such people, how they would behave. They would reduce their footprint, ecological footprint. This is about circular economy. Resource efficiency, minimizing resource depletion, and zeroing, eradicating pollution, which are the 2 obstacles to spontaneous regeneration. So circular economy, which is more a priority for business in this case, triggers, let's say, unlocks, boosts spontaneous regeneration, meant as biomass, which is the only existing carbon sink, photosynthesis, organic carbon in the soil, in the plants, in the forest, in the sea, wherever. A capacity which is multiple of times of the capacity that you have in the atmosphere. So we will be able to fix an enormous amount of carbon by simply boosting spontaneous regeneration. And moreover, and last, regeneration of the biodiversity. Biodiversity is about producing the ecosystem services which are responsible for living conditions on our planet. So this is the model, and we are conscious the only way technologically speaking, to address this hypercomplexity is through artificial intelligence or very sophisticated mathematical models. And this is what we are working on.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Mentioning that the problem requires a complex solution, not a linear one, which I think was very eloquently put. The challenge becomes, people are already so overwhelmed with just the word sustainability. So I think that there's a role for everybody with their expertise to play here and communicating not just the what, but the how and the why. And yeah, you've unlocked a world of conversation too that we can't address. But if our listeners want to learn more, we're going to link in the show notes the Regenerative Society Foundation, where you can learn more. And if we're so lucky, maybe we can have Andrea back on to talk a little more about these sorts of things. In the meantime, Andrea, we're going to ask our final question here, okay? You can choose one of three of these questions, okay? I'm going to give you three, and I'm going to kind of explain what they mean. So the first one is, what is the best piece of advice you've ever received? So that could be something from your mentorship, from your father, your friends, those kinds of things. Second question, what is the main takeaway you want our listeners to have from our conversations? So we've kind of talked about a lot. If our listeners forgot everything and only remembered one thing, what would you want that to be? And the last option is a new question that we've added, which is, what is the most important thing that you have unlearned recently? This is the idea that you used to hold a belief, but something challenged that, you changed your mind, and now you believe something else, or now you view things differently. So those are your three options. Feel free to choose one.
Okay, very good. So I think I will kind of answer the three at the same time.
Okay.
I have an anecdote for you. I was frustrated many years ago about advertising. And I said, no, I must find this super advertising, letting really the Illy brand to blossom. I said, what can I do? I will go to the best people in the world for advertising. So particularly in the premium segment. So I went to France and I interviewed two experts and they both asked me the same question. Can you imagine? What's the Illy dream? What's the Illy dream? I don't know. I don't have an Illy dream. And then 1 year later, by walking, I still remember with my dog, my white dog, in the middle of the snow, I took, oh, Mom, how can I be so stupid? Of course, my grandfather had the dream of offering the greatest coffee to the world. So no dreams, no drive, no purpose, no mission, no nothing. Dream. And I know that this has something much bigger than me said in the past, but dreams are really very, very powerful, because they are contagious and they perpetuate themselves. So as far as the last thing, I hope that I'm not unlearning recently, very recently, it's the last year and a half, is the environmental crisis. And this, by fixing the environmental crisis, we will fix the social one. Apparently, the priority are changing because there is so much inequalities, so much problems with climate migrants, so much hate in wars, etc., that I think we are living a dramatic social decadence crisis, which is becoming even more important and priority to be prioritized before we can seriously address the environmental one. It makes the picture more complicated. The actions needed are the same. We'll probably do the two things at the same time, but it's dangerous because we don't have time to address this environmental crisis. And if we have to be stopped by some political reasons or consumer selfishness, we could enter in the typical metaphor of the tragedy of the commons. This is something we shall think about and step up responsibly and really instill in the people's mind that regeneration is sustainability and regeneration is environmental, but also people's regeneration. Social and philosophical one from the value perspective.
Wow. Well, thank you, Andrea Illy, for sharing all of your insights, all of your knowledge that you've gained over lots of time and experience in coffee. So glad to have you. Many things from this conversation stick with me, but this one really sticks. Andrea mentioned $350 million goes to sustainability investments a year, according to the 2018 Coffee Barometer. The National Coffee Association just published a report revealing that U.S. coffee consumers spend $301 million a day on coffee. Considering the coffee sector's urgent sustainability issues, wouldn't you say that our sustainability spend as a value chain is severely deficient, starting with economic sustainability for farmers? I'm no statistician, so do dig into the data provided in the episode notes. There's a lot there, so brew up a delicious brew, find a cozy corner, and let's get to work. If you're enjoying these conversations, please remember to subscribe to the Coffee Podcast on your favorite podcast platform and share with your coffee-loving friends so we can all join in together. Thanks to Ryan Ingerson for his hard work on the background research for this conversation. Thank you also to Niels Hack, Director of Sustainable Coffee Partnerships at Conservation International, for being my sounding board and private investigator for some of these stats. For now, as always, and until next time, happy brewing.